Good day, and welcome to our presentation on how automating suspect identification saves law enforcement time and money. Today's presentation sponsor is Veritone, and I'm your host, Frank Borelli, on behalf of Officer.com. Our hope is that you will find this presentation informative and of value. Our speakers today are Sergeant Brendan Gill, who's the officer in charge of the Prince George's County Police Department Joint Analysis Intelligence Center, and he serves as its RMS system administrator. Also speaking today is Mr. Robert Harrell, who recently joined the Veritone team in February of this year as the regional manager for the Eastern United States. And at this time, I'd like to hand the presentation off to Mr. Harrell.
Thanks, Frank. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join this webinar. What we're going to talk about today are some of the challenges that agencies and people are facing, and just overall identifying suspects that are captured in video or in still images, or any type of evidence that you're going to need to identify a suspect in from the time you actually receive that data. What are the steps? What are the challenges? And some of the nuances and just overall doing the job. Second, we're going to talk about suspect identification best practices. We're going to, hear from Sergeant Gill over at Prince George's County Police Department on some of the best practices that he is using at his agency. Then we'll go into what the available artificial intelligence technology is right now. Most notably, we'll talk about the Veritone IDentify facial recognition demonstration. And then we'll go into a case study for Anaheim Police Department and see, what implications they got from actually using this type of technology. And so just kind of starting off, Sergeant Gill, why don't you and I just kind of talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're seeing in just identifying suspects that are captured in video or in image evidence. Starting with the numerous amounts of data that you're getting, maybe from the like body cams, private security cameras, in-car cameras. Talk about some of the challenges there first, if you could.
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon again to everybody. So Prince George's County, we're very unique. We are an agency right outside of the District of Columbia. We are composed of 32 municipal partners, each with their own technological program. So aggregating footage from various agencies, should we be called to assist them in investigating, it can be a challenge simply because not everybody has to be on the same platform. Not everybody has the same hardware. The software is different, licensing is different, sources are different. So it can be very cumbersome to really put forth a good investigatory effort when we are dealing with different agencies and their different footage types. Like you said, the perfect example is body-worn camera footage. Recently, about a week ago, we had an incident that involved 3 municipal partners as well as my agency, had a departmental shooting, which was captured on in-car camera. It was captured on various agencies' body camera. That incident spanned a half an hour. So there was a lot of footage to go through, a lot of movement to track, a lot of different vantage points to really sort through to give an investigating agency a clear picture of exactly what the sequence of events was.
Absolutely, I can certainly see, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners here can certainly share in the fact that when you've got that many different siloed data sources, just going through and collaborating with that many different data sources can be a huge challenge in itself. Could you talk about social media? So what kind of social media, what are the challenges in identifying maybe a suspect that, that you're catching or you're capturing through a social media lead?
So social media is one of the greatest things ever. And from a law enforcement perspective, one of the most difficult things ever, all combined into one. So if you think about social media, and we're going to go with footage, Imagery can be a little bit more cumbersome, but let's really focus on video. Social media video is difficult to really get a hold of and analyze simply because of various platforms. Unlike body-worn camera footage and cruiser footage, those are pretty stationary. That's the lens. That's what it sees. It records everything you call today. From the user perspective in social media, generally, those images and those videos are what they want to capture when they want to capture it. And within those footages are nuggets of truth. There's glimpses of what you may, as an investigator, be looking for. And it can be very difficult to find that, one or two frames of important things, which is generally surrounded by a bunch of fluff. Also, there's just so many different platforms. You have YouTube, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have all these other mediums in which this footage can be uploaded. Trying to grab that to a cohesive and aggregate it to a cohesive element is very, very, very difficult. And say you do get it, analyzing that footage takes forever. It can be time consuming. The quality could be poor. Trying to aggregate and extrapolate information out of it can be very difficult to maneuver. It's not the easiest thing to do in the world.
Got it. No, I completely understand. So what about some of the considerations from like your state and your federal or Homeland Security, those different agencies or entities that kind of have their nuances with sharing or with what can be shared, what can't be shared. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and you said the perfect phrase earlier when we were talking about different agencies and the interoperability thereof. Is the key phrase you used is siloed. When you start talking about state and federal, agencies, they are also fragmented and siloed. Granted, we've, as a nation, have made strides in trying to communicate law enforcement together over the past 10 years, but those challenges and those hurdles, they still exist to this day, where a lot of the footages aren't necessarily immediately available to law enforcement. Some state agencies require waiting periods and paperwork and subpoenas for footages and incidents that may have been captured even right in front of their building. They may take time for them to even authorize the dissemination of video. Recently, I was investigating a departmental accident that occurred in our jurisdiction in front of the Motor Vehicle Administration. And the amount of hoops that we had to jump through just to get the footage off of the side of their building was ridiculous. Granted, it took some time and we got it, but it's still frustrating when you have to kind of try to aggregate the various data sources just to get a complete picture of what incident or of how the incident took place.
Wow, so that sounds like a compound headache there. You've got the different sources, but then you've got the different, bureaucracy of even getting certain data or certain evidence to actually to even investigate itself. So absolutely. For example, if it takes, so you have a hot lead of an incident that was captured on and posted to YouTube, you may have that footage immediately, but it may take you 2-3 weeks to get footage from a government building, and those leads may be immediate in nature. If it takes you 2-3 weeks to analyze those feeds, to put that picture together, you lose time. And, as a law enforcement officer, we all know time is of essence. When you're investigating cases, leads go cold, investigators get pulled into other things, things become stale the longer it takes. So putting everything together quickly is of paramount concern. That unfortunately is still a challenge to this day when you're trying to retrieve footage from agencies and other entities that have red tape. Absolutely, and that certainly, and that kind of brings me into the holding evidence period, right? How long you actually, certain things, and I think you kind of touched on that there, but just how long you have to hold certain cases or certain evidence depending on, what type of case it is. Can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean, every state generally has their own retention policies for evidentiary matters. Maryland, I believe, is 75 years for homicides plus 20 if an individual is convicted at the time after their sentence. So you have to keep it for a certain amount, and then if someone's convicted, you have to keep it until they have served their sentence plus 20 years after they've served it. Really going to from a forensic perspective or a video perspective, capturing, retrieving, and storage are probably your biggest hurdles for an agency to overcome, because the storage of evidence, that's something that really requires database architecture, it requires a safe place, it requires access, control, auditing, it requires a significant amount of forethought to what are you going to do? Great, you have a homicide that's captured on a YouTube video. Okay, now what? You have it. You've analyzed it. What do you do with it now? And those conversations are really critical for a long-term success of any video evidence program.
Right. Sounds like certain things you've got to store pretty much forever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some things you have to store for a very long time. And then you have to come up with a medium and ensure that it's maintained. So just because you have the file doesn't mean in 40, 50, 60 years that file's still going to be visible. As technology changes, your old files don't, and that, those are the things that one must endure.
Absolutely. Another set of challenges to even go on top of just the evidentiary challenges that you have. So just kind of moving on, can you talk a little bit about the best practices that you guys kind of have at your agency?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that from the past perspective to today is Prince George's County has made inroads over the last 5 or so years in really modernizing how we approach not just document or incident documentation, but also the handling of various footages. Like 5 years ago, although body-worn cameras was a thing per se, and I'm doing quotes meaning thing, but I know you guys can't see it. It was a thing, but our agency didn't participate in it simply because of these challenges. What do I do with the evidence? What are the policies surrounding it? How long do I have to keep it? Some of those hurdles have been overcome. But when we started setting up systems to store incident documentation and store the various things that go along with it, we quickly realized that there are so many different formats for so much of this material that we needed a way to aggregate it truly into one usable format. There are several software solutions that do just that, and that's exactly what we have been able to do. So we spend a lot of time, money, and effort to ensuring that the evidence that we need to recover, that is recovered, is maintained, and that evidence is also placed into a format that allows longevity. Okay. That formatted evidence, right, so whether it be, we'll use the example of video from inside of a jail, that's coupled with a phone call. So you have an inmate on the phone having a conversation with somebody, and there's also video of that inmate on the phone. You're taking those two files together. What do I do with the phone call? And then what do I do with that video evidence? Trying to, in the past, get those together was a nightmare to ensure that it is investigatory in nature, so you can actually do analysis and receive some decent intelligence out of it. So we've been able to do just that. We've been able to run our phone calls now through a transcription service that allows us to filter out specific keywords as it happens. Then that allows us to get good intelligence out of it. So we have the video footage and the transcription of the phone call, which provides us with a bigger picture as to what is occurring, and it does allow us to provide our investigators with a significant amount of intelligence that we never used to be able to have. So continuing with that metaphor, let's say we have that transcription, you have that video evidence. How do we then link it all into one incident, linking it back to one specific event that occurred? That in itself is a challenge. Case number tagging is something that has always been difficult to manipulate, simply because it involves a little bit of a human interaction. An officer actually has to tag that evidence with the case number. So what we've done is we've standardized a lot of our practices where it's the same unique key regardless if it's a physical piece of evidence, regardless if it's audio, video, a still photo, doesn't matter. We have one unique identifier that transcends all of our software, all of our systems, to ensure that that number on that item remains constant. It's unique. It revolves, it starts every year. So next year it'll start with the number of 20 for 2020. But that maintains the longevity of our suites of software.
Okay.
We have ensured that all of our software platforms are not siloed into one physical space. There are a lot of agencies that, they're just like us. They're modernizing the way they handle a lot of their electronic mediums for incident documentation and evidentiary matters and court summonses. But unfortunately, some of those agencies, they put it in one space. Granted, sure, there are some monetary concerns with that because it can get expensive. But one of the things that we've done is we've ensured that all of our servers, not only are they backed up, but we have a primary and secondary site. So we have a primary site where we have application servers and switches and hardware for where things go, which is then backed up to a secondary site. Should something go south, we have the ability to very quickly roll over to that plan B and continue operating as normal. That is critical when we start talking about the true modernization of digital evidence. But that also allows officers and administrators to be able to say, this is accurate, this is safe, this is by design how we wanted to ensure the longevity of everything that we've captured. Placing all of your evidence into one electronic storage medium is dangerous.
Right.
It's very, very dangerous. You never want to silo it that way, ever.
Yeah, can't be too safe, and it sounds like you guys have a bit of redundancy built in there, which is great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, we absolutely wanted to make sure that the service that we do provide to our investigators, that information is maintained for a very long time. Which leads me to the next point, is having all that information and then beginning to analyze that information. There's the old adage that system administrators will use, database architects will use, which is garbage in and garbage out. So fantastic, you have your phone call from your inmate, you have your video from the inmate, you have the video from the suspect. Let's just say you've tagged it appropriately, you've put it into a double or triple redundant system. How do you then take that information and aggregate it with the incident or suspect information to ensure that you do get viable leads, that you do have enough information to ensure when you make a decision saying, hey, I think this image of this unknown subject is the same person that was stopped 6 months ago in, outside of an area or town or a city within your jurisdiction. Knowing those demographics and ensuring that those arrest records and field interviews and initial incident reports and impounds, and ensuring that information is as accurate as possible is the easiest and quickest way to allow for video analysis to be accurately and appropriately done. Ensuring that your baseline records management system has the most current, the most up-to-date information is absolutely critical. Without that, you could have the best quality imagery in the world, the best footage in the world. If you have nothing to compare it to, nothing accurate to compare it to, unfortunately, that's really going to be a hindrance. In Prince George's County, we have a dedicated staff of reviewers to ensure that the data we collect from our officers is as accurate and as quick and as timely as possible to allow for those investigators to make those leaps very quickly.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, if you could have the best footage in the world, but if you have nothing to compare it to, if you have nothing accurate to compare it to, how beneficial is that footage really going to be? Right.
And then so you another one of your points is be mindful of interoperability provisioning when setting your system up.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So ensuring that quick flow between one siloed partition to another, should it be needed, is very important. It goes back to the whole YouTube versus body-worn camera versus, MVA footage conversation, where if you're going to take electronic evidence, ensuring that you have the means to transfer it from point A to point B to point C, and knowing what that flow is and knowing how it goes through. Granted, I'm not talking about from a system design perspective, but from the user perspective, being able to grab that information and manipulate it is very important. Making sure that you set that up properly is very important. Having those conversations is critical, not just in knowing what you want to do, but how do you get to the next step, and then looking past that to ensure that the decisions that are made during initial setup of any software suite, that is very important. Prince George's County, that's exactly what we did. We have a staff of 4 people now that legitimately will go through these long-term planning goals when it comes to software and have a conversation and sit down with the committee to say, okay, this is what we want to do. What does that impact look like in terms of all of the other software that we do have? Is there a better way to do this? What have other agencies done? So setting up a core group to say this is the end goal, whether it be forensics, whether it be incident documentation, UCR reporting, whatever it may be, and then making a path going forward while still ensuring that all of the software that touches that platform are accounted for. A lot of people miss that step. They say, okay, I want to buy ABC in 5 years, and this is where we're going to store it. But they forget about what they already still have and what impacts that's going to have on their current systems.
Absolutely. There's nothing like getting a new tool or being told that, hey, this is a new tool. The decision came from the top, and then there's no, then you have to just kind of make it work yourself without, mindfully planning that out ahead of any purchases or ahead of any new technology that you deploy in an agency.
Oh, absolutely. Just throwing something out that sounds great and saying, okay, use this now, is what happens quite frequently. And then your end users are looking around going, I don't really know where this fits in. I don't really understand what the best practice is. And unfortunately, there's always that disconnect between the top and the bottom. The middle are kind of looking around going, okay, well, this is cool, but what else does it do? How else can I make this, more beneficial towards my specific role in the organization? And that's where a lot of the disconnect occurs is this tool's great, but I don't really know how it's going to work best for me.
Absolutely. And then so that kind of gives us into or takes us into, making sure you're getting, other opinions or looking at other agencies that are progressive as well. Just kind of, can you talk about just getting that second opinion from similar agencies?
Oh, that absolutely. So that's one of my absolute favorite things to do and favorite phone calls to take, where other agencies will come in and say, hey, look, listen, we've heard, from IACP or major city chiefs or from other conferences, hey, we've heard about your agency doing A, B, and C. We're thinking about doing the same thing. Can you help us? In Prince George's County, I'm lucky to have a director that says, absolutely, that is one of our missions, not just to, maintain our own suite of software, but also to spread that knowledge. So making sure that agencies that are deciding to start a project, there's really no sense in them doing it by themselves. There's no sense in an agency trying to reinvent the wheel when an agency somewhere else close may actually have already done that and it can share the pitfalls and some of the concerns that they've had to assist that other, agency in setting up their new goals, their new plans, their new software, their new policies, procedures. So we preach very heavily, and we also do this very heavily, to one, conduct a business process review for any sort of new implementation to determine internally what policies, procedures, and best practices already exist, but also to do a phase 2, which is to reach out to another agency. We get a lot of phone calls from a lot of other agencies nationally about various information technology related matters, intelligence gathering related matters. And we, just like some other agencies, are absolutely more than willing to help, simply because when we need to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, we're thinking about doing A, B, and C, how do you do it? We know what it feels like for another agency to say, oh, yeah, we've done that. Here, we'll help you.
Absolutely. That's so beneficial. Sergeant Gill, I appreciate you actually sharing those best practices. So what we're going to do now is just kind of shift over to talking about what solutions and what benefits are actually available with artificial intelligence technology. So, as you mentioned, Sergeant Gill, some of the challenges and just being able to quickly identify and some of the nuances and having to manage multiple different systems to get to the same outcome. That's, a lot of those same challenges, of course, are pain points for multiple agencies out there. And with the availability of AI technology, a lot of that stuff now you're able to actually automate. With the Veritone IDentify solution specifically, a couple of the things that you're able to do are, you're able to leverage the data that you already have. So your current arrest records databases that you have at your disposal, but too many times we find that as soon as we're trying to identify a suspect, instead of going to our own database and having someone kind of search that, we're going to a BOLO first, right? Or we're kind of reaching out to other people to see if they know this individual without leveraging the power of being able to automated search your own booking database first to get those leads on who those suspects could be before actually, going to those other steps. So with AI technology, you're getting time savings. You're able to aggregate your people of interest. You're able to curate those different suspect lists. And also like we talked about, collaboration. It's already hard enough with different entities it takes a lot of time to collaborate. With tools like the Veritone IDentify application, you're actually able to collaborate inside your agency very quickly, but also with neighboring agencies that are sharing data as well. So what I'll do is kind of, why don't we get into a demo of the IDentify Veritone solution here, and then we'll go ahead and take questions right after that.
The first thing that you're going to want to do once you enter the Veritone IDentify application is simply create your case. You'll simply input your case ID as well as a case name, and it'll immediately prompt you to start uploading your evidence. You can upload any video or image evidence that you have associated with the case. And once your evidence is uploaded, it all lives within the evidence tab of your case, where you can go in and view the evidence file. From here, you can simply process your file, select the databases that you would like to run against. Hitting the process button will do two things. First, it's going to run facial detection, which simply means that it's going to find all your faces within the file that you've wanted to process. The second is it's going to run recognition, which simply means that it's going to match those faces that were detected to the databases that you selected. Once your evidence is completed processing, you can view your matches. On the left, we have all of our facial detection outputs, and simply by clicking on each of our faces here, our list of potential matches could change. We can filter out our results based off of any arrest record information that we know to be true, as well as we can view additional details on the suspects within our list. Once we're happy with our suspects, we can simply add our match as a suspect, which will then save that suspect over in our suspects tab of the case, where we'll have quick and easy access to all additional information that we have, as well as we can share that information to anybody else within our department. From here, once an arrest has been made or a conviction has occurred, we can confirm our match, which will simply label that our suspect was confirmed, as well as it'll create an automatic note in our notes field of the case. For all evidence that you process that does not produce any results, due to maybe it's a first-time offender or that person does not live within the databases that you selected, we have a separate database called the People of Interest database, which will allow you to simply save unknown faces to this database and continuously monitor for those faces over time should they commit additional crimes. So let's say that this person here is the suspect that we are initially investigating. I can save this person here as Detective Aviv Redlich, and then the case number that he's associated with, and I can add him to our people of interest database. If this person commits a crime anytime in the future, and subsequently that new evidence gets processed against this people of interest database, there will be a match letting you know that this suspect has previously committed a crime, and this will now be able to increase collaboration and transparency amongst multiple investigators who may be chasing the same suspect.
Okay, so that was the Veritone IDentify demo, and just to kind of share a little bit of feedback from this application. Anaheim Police Department has actually been using the tool for about a year. Some of the challenges that they were having, prior to looking at this, and just in identifying suspects in general, was, first the lengthy time. It could take days to even weeks to identify suspects, with putting out bolos, making phone calls to other agencies, waiting for public feedback to give them leads. They couldn't use their own arrest records or their own bolos. So, previous bolos, they go out, they're gone. They had to create new ones. They heavily relied on social media to try to identify people as well. And, so also officer safety during surveillance of people of interest, of course, that's always a concern, and then the lack of success with previous facial recognition tools. And so after using this tool, one of the things that they were able to do was they were able to speed up the actual identification process. Being able to upload fast, compare fast, review the leads that you get, curate and share data very quickly has made this a success for them. In fact, they've cleared over 100 suspects currently, including a homicide case as well. And we're able to really get some interesting leads from this tool. So with that, I will go ahead and open it up to Frank. I'll hand it over to you.
I appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for all the information. Before we get into the few questions that we have for Q&A, I'd like to step back a minute and forgive me as you see me change the slide. Admittedly, it's been a little bit of time since I worked the street, and you all commented on how it could take days or weeks to identify the suspects and all the tools used. I remember when it would sometimes take months because we were dependent only on witnesses, and most often they were friends of the suspects or associates of the suspects. And I think this speaks to not only the power of the video, but the necessity of these AI tools. So I'd like to ask Sergeant Gill, can you give me any kind of idea or estimate on the investigative time that's been saved? And I'm not just talking about in the evidence of the video comparisons. I'm talking about from start to finish on a case. How many man hours do you think that we're saving, that we're cutting time out of these investigations? Can you make any kind of educated guess on it?
That's a very good question. Ironically, I was speaking at a conference last week where that similar question was posed, and it's more, broad than a lot of people think. I mean, if you look at how times change, right, and policing changes, technology changes, the evolution of society changes. 10 years ago, we didn't have all of the tools that we did today. Even 7 years ago when I was an investigator, it would take months, weeks of searching and going through old beat books and trying to go through, the arrest the booking photos to see if someone matches the description, where now that time is cut in significantly into half, even, 2/3 more so, to allow investigators to truly make connections and not have to rely, like Robert was saying, on bolos and sending them out and hoping at some point someone would send that back and say, hey, I think I saw this guy 6 months ago at this address. That can significantly reduce time. I mean, if you're asking for a very specific amount of reduction, I mean, it depends on the case.
I get that, but what you're saying is that there can be a significant number of man hours that do get saved using this kind of process. And the reason I ask that is because we've gotten a question from a gentleman at the Colebrook Police Department, and I think Mr. Harrell can answer this. It goes in hand with another question that we had. He wants to know, does the software communicate with existing current arrest record storage? Now, he doesn't specify what they're using, and I imagine there's some softwares it does communicate with, some that it doesn't. But the other question we had was, how do users ingest data into IDentify? And I think they might go hand in hand. Mr. Harrell, can you give me an idea of what other systems or what systems it will work with, won't work with? How well does it work integrated across the system?
Absolutely. So, and that's a great question. So we haven't found a single system that it won't work with, simply because of how the actual libraries are created. So when you look at, regardless of what type of system you're using to store your arrest records, they all break down into pictures, which are either PNGs or JPEGs, and then a bunch of metadata about that picture. And so when you're building your library or your case folders within IDentify, you're taking batches of that data. So you're taking all of your arrest records, the metadata, you're training the AI algorithm on those photos, and then you're also tying the metadata to those photos. So when a suspect comes up as a potential match, it's going to have the subsequent arrest records with it. So it's going to have the data, like height, weight, hair color, eye color, whatever you would store in your arrest record, but also the type of arrest that they've actually been arrested for, and any other different times that they've been arrested. Those photos will actually be on that same record as well. So, so with that said, we're assisting agencies with how to upload this data. And we are actually showing them how to go in, build the library, so they can have, one library that is your arrest records that gets updated, daily, weekly, monthly, however the agency would set that schedule. But then you can also have a separate library full of, people of interest. This could be, just people over the years that you've gathered that have maybe, may have been associating with certain individuals, or just people that you need to have a people of interest database for. You could train the library for those individuals as well. And so, so you can actually set these multiple different libraries and then run facial recognition against those different libraries. Primarily, what we're finding out that agencies are starting with is just arrest records. They get a video. They upload the video. The system runs face detection, so it detects all faces within that video first, and then it runs facial recognition against those detected faces to find out if anyone in those videos is actually someone that may be in your database.
And that's probably the most efficient way to start out for somebody fresh using this type of AI.
Absolutely.
At least that would be what I would think. Sergeant Gill, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That communicating with that siloed structure to ensure that your platforms move freely. Your searches move freely, and then like Michael was saying, getting that facial recognition done after facial identification is important. And that all has to do with how you set up your storage medium for those images. If you have an API or an application product interface. That's exactly how it should be done.
Cool. So, Mr. Harrell, we have another question from a gentleman named Keith, Houma Police Department, Houma, and it's a simple question. What's the cost of the program?
Right. So we could talk about the cost of the program offline. It really, there's a few different pricing structures on it. Really, it's based on your population size. So it's your county or city population size. So that's kind of the best way to answer that. And we can certainly get a lot more detailed with you offline, off of the call. But the structure is pretty straightforward in how it's based.
Excellent. We'll make sure you have Mr. Kraft's contact information so you all can follow up with that. Another question that we have here is, what file formats does IDentify support?
Okay, so that's another great question. Currently, it is all of your general file formats. So your most basic ones, like your MP4s, your JPEGs, your PNGs. However, one of the benefits in working with Veritone is we are very aggressive in helping our agencies to actually ingest the data that they receive, not just what we feel is going to be the best formats. So if an agency is receiving a bunch of different codexes, they can actually reach out to us, and we will work with them to build ingestion adapters for those different codexes so that you can begin to start ingesting that evidence as well. Now, we can't promise that that's something that can be done overnight, but it is something that can be done. We've had to do it with other file formats. And so certainly, right now, basically, it's the general file formats, JPEGs, PNGs, MP4s, any of the videos that don't have a strong proprietary codex. And I know that's kind of loaded because each one has a different codex to it. Each, different vendor kind of does that. But we are able to just kind of take what you're getting and look at it on a case-by-case basis. And if you're getting a ton of that data, we will work on the back end to figure out ways to ingest it.
Excellent, excellent. So, Sergeant Gill, it's a question for you. If you can, in brief, what was Prince George's County's workflow in the past, and how has it changed when dealing with suspect ID evidence? So we talked about this real briefly, the difference from 10, 20 years ago to now, but more specifically, since these tools have been available, what was the workflow, what did it used to be, and how's it changed now?
Sure, yeah. I mean, like we said earlier, we went from every investigator trying to find their own video or analysis or their own evidence themselves, putting it on a bolo, video was grainy, images of suspects was grainy, sending it out to a mass distribution list and saying, hey, please let me know, to now what we've done is we've centralized it where we actually have a specific unit within the agency, and if an officer believes that there may be footage, they actually go and retrieve that footage. The officers don't do it; the unit does it. They do it very systematically. They grab all the the back end media players that is needed with it. It's placed into a very specific set of software to do some initial analysis and cleanup and metadata tagging. And now the workload has decreased. Our efficiency has increased, and the time it takes to retrieve video and photographic evidence, analysis thereof, all the way to suspect identification has decreased tremendously, using the various platforms and a systematic progression to getting things very quickly.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that answer. And then this last question, gentlemen, is for both of you. And I'm going to do this very particularly because I've got a twisted sense of humor like this. I want to hear Mr. Harrell's answer and then Sergeant Gill's answer, because one's very business-oriented, if you will, and the other is very operationally oriented. So can you imagine, do you see any other diverse use cases for IDentify for this type of software in the near future? Mr. Harrell.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've had agencies that have kind of looked at this and they said, hey, it's great for investigations, but we've also got initiatives with human trafficking victims, things of that nature, and of course suspects, as well as homeless, right? Making sure that when you spot someone or you get evidence of a homeless person that you're looking to reunite with their family, being able to identify who that person is, and then being able to actively, progressively, reach out to their family and say, hey, your loved one that you haven't seen in years has been spotted in this area, just kind of reuniting them is also a very good use case that I could see working for this software as well.
Okay. Now, Sergeant Gill, and I'm asking you second because we're cops and we have to find creative ways to solve problems that we never ever expected to see. And these are the kind of tools that allow us to go, well, we could do this. So do you see any other kind of uses that Mr. Harrell didn't answer that? It's something else we could do with something like this in the near future?
Well, I think to his credit, he took my top answers. One was missing persons.
Sorry about that.
Thank you for making me go last on this one because I wanted to steal that thunder. But no, I mean, I think that is very appropriate. Software is only as good as how it's implemented. At the same time, we may have a purpose for a specific thing today, and in 10 years from now, we're like, oh, actually, we did A, B, C, and D with it. Some specific examples, predictive policing. I mean, that's something that started out on the West Coast. It's now making its way onto the East Coast, and couple that with facial recognition and tracking movement, tracking vehicles, all of those combined really gives you a better understanding of not only A, who committed a specific act, but B, what are the precursors for a specific crime type in a specific neighborhood. Because from a criminological standpoint, we all know that criminals generally don't fly 400 miles to commit a crime. They do it, within 30 miles of where they are laying their head. So getting that picture, getting that momentum, tracking that, identifying that with, those that have already come into contact with local law enforcement improves your ability to reduce your crime quicker than just reacting to things. So this is more proactive. This is more of a predictive policing aspect. And it really can help, drive that crime to its floor. We'll never get rid of it all, but it'll help you drive it to the floor to where you can make arrests more confidently, quickly, expertly, and, present for prosecution. So, and then there's the whole missing persons thing. So thanks again for stealing my thunder.
Ultimately, that prosecution is the goal. So we had two last questions come in. The gentleman wants to know if this software program will work for private investigators or if it's only mainly for law enforcement, and if it is available for PI agencies to be used, is there a separate price structure for them?
Okay, so today it is only rolled out for law enforcement agencies. That's not to say that in the future there's not going to be a version of this that is available for private investigators. So when you're dealing with arrest records and things of that nature, you're also dealing with permission-based systems. And so until we've crossed that bridge of where law enforcement agencies are comfortable allowing private investigators to actually go in and access their data on that aspect, we just really haven't crossed that bridge yet. However, just looking forward at this tool, I could certainly see an instance of this being available for private investigators with their own data, loading in their own people of interest. But again, that's a bridge we haven't crossed. There may be some legality around that. So I would say stay tuned for our next wave or iterations of this application.
And you make a very good point because when you're looking at this application in a headquarters setting, if you will, a secured center versus whether or not there's ever an application for it, or if this can be used on a mobile laptop system, you start getting into the restrictions of what can and cannot be transmitted. And I assume, rightfully so, that's all taken into consideration and what can be sent out and what can't and where it has to be in a secured system and all that, correct?
Absolutely. Those are very strong considerations that we have to go through with every agency that will look to deploy this system.
Well, I tell you, gentlemen, we've come so far from the beginning days of a mobile data terminal and just being able to send text messages and ask questions and take a little bit of radio traffic away to the days of aggregating video and being able to compare something like facial recognition and then redacting the video for evidence structure and everything else. This is a truly, I don't want to say edge type of software that is going to become a linchpin in law enforcement work as we move into the future, at least from my perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the amount of data that we're generating on a daily basis is only increasing. And so the amount of video, the amount of evidence that we're going to get, it's only going to increase. And so tools like this are only going to get better. And of course, with AI and machine learning, you're getting a tool that's actually getting better as you use it as well. And so that's what we're looking to really do is, make sure that we are providing the most cutting edge solutions and that we're staying forward thinking with our technology.
Yeah, I just to piggyback off of that. I mean, it's the amount of telecommunication things that are out there. It can be overwhelming. I mean, if you're just looking for one incident, God forbid it occurs inside of a crowded bar, the amount of footage that a person would have to go through, it can take weeks. And then we're just talking inside of a bar on a Friday night, let alone incidents that span time. So, a 30-second clip may take you a couple of days to go through, but if you're trying to track an offender back to a car and then track the car to its origin and you're going backwards in time with 4 different cameras, forget it. You're going to be there forever. And software like this, it will only get better with time, making investigators be able to focus on the things that they actually have to focus on and not sitting at a screen scrolling saying, hey, I think this looks like someone I saw 6 months ago.
Yeah. And we are all too familiar with how humans make mistakes like that. And quite thankfully, if the data is of value, then the machine learning systems and the AI don't make the mistakes as readily as we humans do. So
bingo. And that's one of the biggest things when you start talking about setups is ensuring that your base, that pyramid of data management, your first layer is solid, your RMS system's solid, your data is solid, and then everything else just falls right into place.
And from everything I've heard today, Veritone and their systems, they work with the agencies to ensure that level of accuracy and integration of information and data and backlog and all the rest of that.
Absolutely. We are hyper-focused on making sure that the agencies that partner with us are getting the best long-term technology solution partners, not just a vendor of an application. We are going to work with agencies for the long term, for making sure that, we're looking at the data that you're receiving today. We're predicting, the amount of data that you're going to get in the future and what's the best way to actually, manage that stuff and provide the best solution to future-proof you.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I don't see any other questions coming up. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to give this presentation to our audience.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
it's our pleasure. This is exactly what we like to have, this kind of valuable information going out to our readership and our audience. It's a rarity that we get something that is this succinct but of value at the same time, if you understand what I'm saying. So thank you to both of you very much. I'd like to thank everyone who joined in and viewed our presentation today. Hope you saw the value in it and would remind you it'll be archived on officer.com for the next 12 months. Please come back to it for use as a resource or recommend it to others who might find value in it as they perform their duties or seek solutions for this type of automating suspect identification. Thank you again and stay safe.